Celsus is not a Christian, you know that, yeah? Yeah, so when he was doing what I'm doing with you right now, he's debating him. So Origin was expected to provide an apologetic response. When he did, he allegorized. So what I'm saying is, where something seems inconsistent, he allegorizes. That's all I'm saying. And so therefore, from our paradigm, we're saying there shouldn't be any inconsistencies anyway. And even here's what we're saying. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
So let me reply. Because what you've just said is admit that my principle is accurate. Because I said that you've got to judge the Quran from within an Islamic paradigm. And you've got to judge the Bible from within a Christian paradigm. And the historical Christian paradigm is not based upon literal prima facie interpretation. That is the historical, continuous use of scripture from the church fathers to the present. Church fathers today are still doing the same thing. One second.
Right.
You believe that the Quran is inherent in all of its statements, but you never addressed the flat earth. And when you did address it, you said it was from the perspective of the people. So kind of the same kind of arguments that a flat earth.
But that's not the same as allegorization.
Well,
you know that.
Yeah, but one second. But that statement that you've made about from the perspective of the birds isn't coming from the Quran. That is coming from you as an apologist defending what the Quran is plainly saying. That's
the genetic fallacy, right? Because what you've just fell into is the genetic fallacy. Whether I'm offering an apologetic reply or not is irrelevant. Most of your church fathers, like Justin Martyr, was an apologist. It doesn't mean just because he's doing that what he's saying is wrong. So you're better than that to make these kinds of interrogations. And what I say is, in terms of the perspectival, the anthropological, human phenomenological perspective, that's very clear in the Quran. That is what is intended. You know, that there's two recipients of the Quran, the human beings and jinn. So it's going to be from the human perspective. It's not going to be from a transcendental, godly perspective that he can see every little thing. That's not what it's meant to be. It's meant to be a thing. Another thing is this: the point of Origin of Alexandria. What I'm saying is, the hermeneutical principle is problematic because if you say the question is, here's the question, and I asked this to many people that I'm sure you would respect, who are Christian scholars in their own right. I said, where do we decide to stop allegorizing, start allegorizing? So now the hermeneutical principle, where do we decide this is where it starts, this is where it stops? What I'm saying is, by the way, you said that I said that the Quran is allegorizing, I allegorize it. No, I don't allegorize anything in the Quran when it refers to a natural history phenomenon.
Okay, so
you see the point?
So let me reply to that. You said that I was guilty of a genetic fallacy.
Yes.
And then you said that Ignatius was an apologist.
No,
Justin Martyr was an apologist. But Justin Martyr was also a bishop.
Yeah, okay.
Are you the equivalent of a bishop? Are you like an ulama? No, it does matter. Because the thing is, you're saying this as an apologist, right? And you're saying this, but you're not an ulama.
Yeah, but I'm quoting them.
Right. So here's the thing.
Alim is a singular.
In terms of the prima facie statements of the Quran, there are many that simply contradict reality. And the only way you can get around that, the only way that you can get around that is to make the Quran say things it doesn't say.
No, but
which is what you've done.
Can I say something?
All the way through this discussion. So that was the first point. The second point, unfortunately, this guy started screaming in my ear, so I'm not sure I remembered what you were saying. Where does the allegorical start and stop? Right, now that is done within the council of the church fathers. So what you do...
Of which Origin is not one.
Well, exactly. So your entire argument was built on someone that isn't even a church father. Let me finish. It is the full scope of the teaching of the church fathers. Think of them like a shura, think of them like a council. You compare all their writings together, and where they sort of focus in on.
Are you talking about ecumenical councils?
No. I'm talking about reading the church fathers as a whole, and where they come to a consensus. This is literal. This is metaphorical. It falls within a spectrum, and it's the church fathers themselves in the reading of them whole that decides for us what is and what isn't. And there'll always be some that fall out of the lines this way and fall out of the lines that way.
What I'm saying to you is that the Islamic perspective, like for example on the Muddy Spring thing, what we are not trying, why I quote classical authorities from the 3rd, 4th, 5th century is to show you that the understanding of people who are not influenced by modern discourses was not put in. It couldn't have been because we're talking about someone in the 4th century. So for example, in the case of the round earth, I quoted Ibn Munada, right? So who is he is one of the students of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. So we're talking about 250 or something, right? So he's a literalist, if anything.
Yeah.
He will be the equivalent of, I don't know, like, I don't know who's a literalist, but maybe...
A biblical fundamentalist.
Yeah, maybe, something like that, right? So he's that. So when you put it from that perspective, what I'm saying is, so therefore he couldn't have, like for instance, you know the issue of the sun. There's one Shadh reading of Ibn Abbas, who's a companion of the Prophet, who put on top of the verse of chapter number 36, verse number 40, وَالشَّمْسُ تَجْرِي لِمُسْتَقَرٍ لَهَا ذَلِكَ تَقْدِيرُ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَكِيمِ. The sun runs to a course. He reads it, وَالشَّمْسُ تَجْرِي لَا مُسْتَقَرَّ لَهَا. And he puts that in his like tafsir, his exegesis. Yeah. The sun runs without a place of setting.
Yeah.
So he's now into exegeting. This man was praised by the Prophet himself. He was praised, he was taught. So it's unlikely that he's going to be trying to make the Quran say something it doesn't say. Do you see what I'm saying?
You know that there are hadiths where Muhammad repeats the claim that the earth sets in a puddle of mud outside of the Quran.
Those hadiths are weak.
Hassan. Not Da'if, they're Hassan.
No, they're weak.
No, wait, this is the point. I believe they're Hassan. I've seen them as Hassan.
Why is it Hassan?
That you talk to your Islamic scholars. I just see...
No,
one second. All I see is how Muslim scholars call it. Some Muslim scholars call it Hassan. You're obviously quoting some scholars say Da'if. I'll have to get you next week. One second.
No, I do give it to you that there's some that say it's Hassan.
Thanks, so I'm not lying.
No, you're not.
Thank you.
No.
So my point is, there are hadiths that are Hassan, right? And just for those that don't know, what is Hassan?
So there's the difference between Da'if and Hassan. Da'if is weak.
Yes, I know that. Hassan.
Then you have another grade which is right above it. It's called Hassan al-Ghayrihi, which is Hassan because of another hadith.
Yeah.
So there may be 2 weak hadiths that make a Hassan al-Ghayrihi.
Yeah.
And then, but Hassan now is depending on which scholar. Because At-Tirmidhi, who wrote Jama' At-Tirmidhi.
All I'm asking is what is Hassan? Just give us the short.
It's referred to as good.
Good.
It's not authentic. Sahih is authentic.
Yeah, I know authentic.
Yeah.
And then there's a level above Sahih.
Yeah.
So my point is that there are hadiths that are Hassan. I've seen them labeled Hassan on Islamic websites.
Exactly.
Right? I'm not in the habit of lying about these things, Hijab. Because I know you'll get blown up if you do. You gotta be clear about stuff.
Of course.
So what we've got is hadiths that are considered Hassan by some scholars, and that takes us into a whole other problem about hadiths, where Muhammad repeats the claim that the sun sets in a puddle of mud, and that is outside of the Quran. So it's clear that there is evidence that early Muslims believe that their prophet believed that the sun set in a puddle of mud.
No, but the thing is, if that was true, we should see that the early exegetes like Tabari, Ibn Kathir is not that early, but he's like somewhere in the 8th century AH. And those literalists, they should have taken that view because they didn't really care about science. For instance, Qurtubi, who is an Andalusian scholar, he argues the earth is flat. Because of he uses the Quran to argue the earth is flat.
Okay.
Right. So he says that it's, for example, Mad al-Ard. Not what he didn't use what you use, by the way. He didn't use the Mahd because that's not. He used.
Yeah, I've got the ones. I've got to find the ones with the carpet.
No. The carpet one is not a good one to use because it's not the one that the Islamic scholars use.
Well, look, all right.
I'll tell you which one.
Yeah, tell me the best one, and I'll come back and I'll use that.
The thing is, what I'm saying is.
No. I'm curious now. Go on. Tell us the best
He uses chapter 13, verse 2.
Chapter 13, verse 2.
Yeah. He doesn't use Mahd. Mahd is a weak. What you were saying was kind of weak.
Yeah. Go on.
Al-Qurtubi mentions Mad al-Ard. He stretched the earth.
Yeah.
He says stretched it. That indicates the flatness of it.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that these scholars, they didn't care about scientific, let's say we're apologists or whatever.
I'm listening.
He didn't give a damn like that. So Al-Qurtubi would mention this kind of thing. You got it, yeah?
I'm
Use
looking
that.
for it. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, on the literal interpretation, there are 2 interpretations. There's one which says it's round and one that says it's flat.
So we agree that there are scholars that don't use literal interpretation.
Say again?
So there are scholars in Islam that are not using literal interpretation.
On naturalistic phenomena.
Yeah.
No. I'll tell you. No, there isn't.
So all Muslim scholars are using literal.
Right? On the naturalistic stuff.
Yeah.
Practically all of them.
Okay.
So we'll talk about the Ash'ari school, the Athari school, and the Maturidi school, and the Mu'tazili school.
Yeah.
So even someone like Az-Zamakhshari, who was a Mu'tazilite, he would see all of those things as literal.
Yeah.
The only ones who didn't were the philosophers.
Yeah.
The philosophers.
Yeah.
But they're not.
Like Ghazali.
No, Ghazali was Ash'ari.
Okay, fair enough.
A philosopher like Ibn Sina, Avicenna,
Yeah.
Al-Farabi, Al-Kindi.
Yeah.
They didn't. So, for example, Al-Farabi, Al-Kindi, and Avicenna, they didn't believe in even the Day of Judgment was going to be physical.
So, I mean, day hijab. It would be nice for me and you to sit down in a place without the crowds.
Yes.
You know, and to have a proper conversation. Because I much prefer this than the shouting matches. To be honest.
I do as well.
I can do, as you know, I can do shouting matches all day.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, right. But ultimately, it just becomes too confrontational. This kind of discourse is good. What I'm going to leave you because
I've got one question for you though.
Let me make one point.
A curious point.
Let me make one point. But what you're going to see is, in the course of our calm conversation, you undid your arguments against the Christian faith. Well, people will make their own judgment.
Yeah, of course.
But I think that in the course of our calm conversation, you actually undermined all the arguments you made.
I don't think so. Yeah. I think I just clarified what I thought was true.
Yeah.
But let me tell you something, right?
Okay. What was your question?
My question was this. You know, you stated that the church fathers.
Yeah.
Tell me if you didn't state it like this, no problem. But you stated that the church fathers, okay, that they had this allegorized understanding of, for example, they didn't exegete Genesis in a literal way.
Yeah.
So who are you referring to in particular?
Augustine. He would be a perfect example. He actually draws out all of the, if you take it literally, all of the obvious prima facie contradictions.
In what book are we talking about?
I'll have to look it up.
Because there's two that I've read. I'll tell you what I've read. Let me explain. There's two. I've read Against the Manichaeans and I've read A Literal Interpretation. By the way, a literal interpretation is going to be hard for you to access. It's not easily, you can't get it on PDF.
Yeah.
I had to go around to get that book.
Yeah.
I actually had to go around to get that book. And so, I read it. Here's my conclusion.
So just let me give you
I don't think he does actually allegorize it.
Augustine, all the church fathers use allegory.
I know, but what I'm saying is Genesis account.
Allegory is the most consistent use of scripture in the church fathers.
Fine, but what I'm saying is, we're talking about, for example, Genesis narrative, right?
Yeah.
No, what you said, Augustine.
All of the Old Testament, they do it throughout the entirety of the Old Testament.
Yeah, no, but what I'm saying
and in the New Testament.
But Augustine, when I read his books, when I read his exegesis on it, he doesn't seem to allegorize it at all. There's no indication of that.
In my reading of Augustine, he definitely,
he definitely
argues.
He refused Alexandria School.
Yeah, he does, because he thinks they think they go too far.
Yes.
But he definitely argues against the idea.
Can I tell you what he says?
Definitely argues against the idea of reading Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 literally. He basically points out, if you read it literally, they contradict one another. And that's the argument that you were making.
Yes, I know.
So you were insisting upon a reading that is alien to Christianity.
No, but Augustine does say that. He problematizes it, but he doesn't say, therefore, we should allegorize it.
Okay, we'll have to look it up and see exactly
for sure.
What he says.
But what I'm saying is...
But he doesn't argue for a literal
let me, can I just tell you what I read and tell me what you think, yeah? So I read John of Chrysostom, yeah? Is that how I pronounce his name? Chrysostom, yeah? He had an exegesis of Genesis. Origen had an exegesis of Genesis. Augustine had an exegesis. Not all of them had it.
Yeah.
The one Origen had was more homiletic.
Yeah.
It wasn't intended to be like. Augustine was not trying to. It's not homily. He was trying to be scrupulous and scholarly, right? Yeah. And he's two different things. So these are the three main ones I've read. I know other church fathers have commented on it, but haven't written or spoken. For example, from that, what I saw was that Origen was an outcast, really, from that perspective. So what I'm saying is, here's why I don't think it's actually a point where using him is a problem. I say, because if you use him, okay, what I'm saying is you said it's not normative, right? From your understanding.
Yeah, he's not. He's an ecclesiastical.
Right. I know he's an ecclesiastical. Right. They have put him in because of the Origen crisis, right? You know what the Origen crisis is?
Yeah, it came in the 5th century.
Yes. So what I'm saying is.
And I think it was harsh and unfair.
Yeah. Most people do. Most scholars that I've read, and that's why I'm surprised with you kind of like degrading him a little bit. He seemed to be a very intelligent man, to be honest with you.
He was.
He seemed to be a man of truth. you know when I was
committed to truth. One second, because
one thing I read from him that, do you know what?
I'm going to try and help you be a better apologist, because you quote Origin.
Well, I think we're both sharpening ourselves.
Yeah, you quote Origin a lot, right? And the thing is, there's no doubt that in terms of church history, he was the first Christian writer of great scope.
Yeah, I mean the most voluminous.
Yeah, he was exactly voluminous. He was. His mind was willing to touch everything. But the thing is, just because he was the first in great scope doesn't mean that he was the sharpest or the best.
Okay. Yeah.
The thing is, Origin, if you look at First Principles and study it carefully, you can actually spot where he goes off the rails in his thinking.
Yeah, I know.
You can trace
Where he
out.
talks about the sun and the moon being is it animate or inanimate?
Oh, bro, yeah, it's even. I think it's even a bit before that. But the thing is as you trace out his thinking, you can see it: orthodoxy. Yeah. Oh crap! And then he just goes off the rails because he makes one logical mistake. And it's about the material, it's about the attributes of God, which is inside
him. I've read it.
Yeah.
Let me make one point.
It was the idea about the eternal creator, which is something you have in Islam, and an eternal creator means an eternal creation.
But let me say one more thing.
Eternal material.
Do you know one thing he said that I read that actually made me really like him?
Something, God, this is great.
Honestly, do you know what he said? He was talking about, this is in his book, First Principles. I read the whole thing.
Yeah.
And to the back of it, he was talking about these things that I was talking to you about in Butterworth's translation, and he said, we need to, this is what he said, and I was so taken aback by it. And I changed my mind on all the church fathers after I read that statement.
I know what you like as a salesman, Hijab, so let's cut the sales
he said this,
come to the point.
He goes, we need to look at the words of the Bible carefully to discern which of it is from God and which of it is from man.
Yeah.
This guy's sincere.
And this is one of the reasons why he would be considered an ecclesiastical writer as opposed to a church father. Because the orthodox Christian position is every part of the Bible is the word of God, and every part of the Bible is the word of man. That is exactly what we believe about the Bible. That it is
but you don't believe in inerrancy.
God's Spirit. No, you see, you've got to listen to me.
I'm listening, yeah.
So the Holy Spirit has inspired every word that man has written in the Bible.
But even the mistakes.
Now, in terms of the inerrancy, right, because you didn't listen when I said it in the debate, so I'll say it to you now. I believe that every part of the Bible is true. Did you hear that? Every part of the Bible is true, properly understood. Which means that those parts that are not meant to be read literally, you don't read them literally. Those parts that are meant to be read literally, you do read them literally. And even on the literal bits, let's just be clear, like, even on the literal bits, when you consider the fact that the Bible is a written account of people's behavior, it's not going to be as, say, perfect as a camera movie of the same events. It will always miss out details. There'll always be room to fit something else in. So when I invite you to the Christian faith, and I do invite you to the Christian faith.
Well, that's the first time you said that.
Well, I'm inviting you.
Oh, you're attacking us all the time.
So I'm inviting you to the Christian faith. I'm not inviting you to believe something like Islam. I'm inviting you to believe something better than Islam.
I understand what you're saying, but let me tell you something, right? You know, you said truth. In philosophy, there's different definitions of truth.
Yeah.
So there's, for example, the consistency, coherentism.
Yeah.
There's correspondence theory, which seems to be the most popular understanding, and then you have pragmatism and different types of. Now, from what I understood, from what you've said, is that the truth of the Bible is not necessarily from a correspondence theory perspective, in the sense that when we say correspondence theory, Bertrand Russell mentions in his book Problems of Philosophy, and others have agreed with them, and this is probably the most popular theory, that, say for example, truth is that which corresponds with objective reality.
Yeah.
Okay? Whereas coherentism, it doesn't have to be correspondent with objective reality, so long as it's internally consistent.
Yeah.
So it's coherent, right?
Yeah.
Here's my only issue with it. You know, with the philosophical understandings of truth, whether we're talking about pragmatism or coherentism or correspondence theory, it would seem like the Bible doesn't fit into any of them. And say why? Because let's say it's not correspondence, yeah? So I accept. We don't accept truth as correspondence for the sake of argument. it has to be read on its terms. I understand what you're saying. We're saying it has to be correspondence. We do believe in it, right? And you're basically saying that you can't apply that standard on us. And I say, okay, fine, accept it. Let's take a coherentism understanding. That so long as it's internally coherent. The problem is, what is there? What use is there of metaphors which contradict each other? Like, for example, if you have a metaphor, like if I speak about the difference between validity and soundness of an argument, is that validity could talk about something which is coherent but not actually in objective reality. So if I say, for example, a unicorn done X, Y, Z, that's a coherent story. If I say a tall short man or a black and white, a black and white at the same time, or a tall short man or a squared circle, that goes against every definition of truth. What I'm saying is, for example, in the Bible, in Genesis, when it
might surprise you, but I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So in Genesis, when it talks about, for example, that the plants were made on the third day, and on in chapter 2 it says, no plant has sprung up yet. Even if we take this as allegorical, the issue is it's not coherent. So even if we wanted to take a different understanding of truth, it still fails that.
So let me reply, because you've actually raised what is a very good question. Which, to be fair, is the first time I think I've ever heard you raise a good question, which is, what is the point of metaphors that contradict one another?
Yes.
This is something that is widely discussed in Christian spirituality, because Christian theologians are obviously aware that there are metaphors, even in Jesus' parables, that are in contradiction. The idea of being a slave, the idea of being a son. How can you be the son and the slave of your father? That's a contradictionary metaphor. And Christians understand the idea of contradictory metaphor in terms of praxis. The idea is that you are meant to live in the middle of these two contradictory metaphors, not embracing one to the neglect of the other, not embracing 50 from one and 50 from other to make 100, but embracing both 100% simultaneously. So the idea of using the son and the slave idea. God is my father. I see myself as adopted into the family of God. But God is also a king. He also rules and owns me. He created me. And so I must act as a son and as a subject at exactly and identically the same time.
That's a good answer. Right. Let me tell you why it's a good answer, right? It's a good answer if I would accept that, if you said that all the biblical kind of direction to the end user was what to do with their own lives.
You made multiple points. Let me reply.
No, just let me get to this point. Let me tell you something. Right?
No. Wait.
Please, before it comes to my head, man.
Hijab.
All right, go on.
Look, right, I also want to point out to you something. That the purpose of the Bible in the Christian faith is very different from the purpose of the Quran in the Islamic faith. The purpose of the Quran is the nascent proto-genesis of Sharia. It is the basis, the framework, the scaffolding upon which the Hadith put the layers. Am I being unfair?
Yeah, that's fine.
No, that's fair, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, but the point of the Bible...
But that's not the only point.
The point of the Bible is that it is the means by which we understand God and ourselves in the world, the narrative by which we live our lives.
Right, I understand. Right, here's the issue, right? So we have two types of injunctions, let's say, or types of sentences in the Quran, for the sake of, or in any speech. We have sentences which are either commands to people telling them what to do, right? And you have what you call khabar, or narratives. Now, I understand even if what you said is a little bit far-fetched, that praxis and you have to live between the two metaphors, I accept for the sake of argument. The issue here is, when it comes to statements about history, okay, when we're talking about narrative, the truth of the matter is, every logician on the face of the earth will tell you that two contradictory things is a meaningless statement. It doesn't exist. It's not real. It's worse than myth. There's no nature in which, or there's no possible world in which what you're saying makes sense.
No, you misunderstand.
So just on this point, right?
So you misunderstand.
The idea, if God is telling me that the plants were created on the third day, and in Genesis 1:12, whatever it was, and then in Genesis 2:5, he's saying no plant has sprung up yet. He's not telling us to be anything here. So you said hold on. He's not telling us to be anything here. He's not telling us to be between two praxis or nothing. He's just saying two things which contradict each other, which, for all intents and purposes, really, you can say is a meaningless statement.
Let me reply.
It's absurd. It's something which doesn't exist.
But you're wrong. You're so wrong, Hijab. The point of Genesis, think about who Genesis was revealed to. It was revealed to the free slaves of Egypt. And what were they born into? Those slaves, those ignorant, barbarized slaves.
But it's meant to
When
be
they
for all of
finish,
us,
let me finish. They were born into a polytheistic society in which there was a god for the water, and a god for the sun, and a god for the land, and a god for the plants, and a god for these animals, and a god for that animals. So Genesis is telling them something. It's telling them that there is only one God and only one creator, and he is the creator of everything that is created. These Bronze Age barbarized slaves were not looking for a science lesson.
Yeah,
they were
that.
looking for a theological lesson.
Can I come
One
back?
second.
Right.
And they get that in Genesis. You are repeating the same error that you made in our debate. You are assuming that because we live in a modernist scientific world,
No.
that people back in the Bronze Age were also thinking scientifically. They were not.
Okay,
And
okay.
so a
I say
scientific,
something?
one second, a scientific criticism of Genesis is invalid.
Okay.
Because it wasn't written scientifically for a scientific
Okay,
people.
I grant you that. Here's what I said.
Thank you.
No. I grant you. Let's go with that for the sake of argument. That it's not meant as a scientific thing, right?
So a scientific criticism is invalid.
No, I don't think it is invalid. But what I'm saying is, let's take for the sake of argument that you can interpret the Bible in a way which is non-scientific. Allegorical.
You definitely can.
Allegorical.
You definitely can.
Yeah, fine, no problem. Yeah, what I'm saying is this: even on that basis, okay, if you do that, if you look at Genesis 1:12, where it says that the plants had been made on the third day, and look at Genesis 2:5,
Yes.
where it said no plant has sprung up yet.
Yeah.
Here, this particular specificity, I'm not talking about the entire, the motif or the theme of Genesis. This is contradictory. So I am left to assume that it's false. Now, even on a coherentist understanding of truth, not a correspondence understanding, I'm not saying it has to correspond with objective reality. I'm saying even on a coherentist understanding, there's no need for that to be the case. Now, what I'm saying is this: the Quran, it's not saying, when it says لَوَجْدُ فِي اخْتِلَافًا, if this was from other than God, they would have found in it many contradictions. What it's saying is that it's the principle of sufficient and necessary conditions. Now, the truth of the matter is, in our logical day-to-day life, we require a certain level of, there's an evidentiary bar that is required in order for us to come to a conclusion about things. If that evidentiary bar is not met, then we can't believe in those things. How can I be punished for disbelieving in contradictory statements?
So let me address that point. Because once again, you've demonstrated what all your Dawah mates do. Ali Dawah, Shamsi, I know he's not your mate. Hashim, Mansour, you all make this cartoonish characterization of Christianity and then you attack it. If you had actually taken the time to read Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, you would see that what they are communicating is different. Genesis 1 is talking about the creation of the world and everything in it. Genesis 2 is talking about man's place in the world. So it's talking about the creation from the theological perspective of the importance of mankind. So the chronology is not actually important, because the teaching theologically is different. One second, let me finish. You should also know that there's plenty of Christians that do harmonizations between these things. You should know that.
I know that. But most of them don't.
Because most of them recognize that from a literary point of view, you don't need to. Because it's buying into a modernist myth, which is this idea that we should judge ancient literature by a scientific...
So is it Ishiology?
One second. By a scientific paradigm of today, and that is ahistorical. Now, let's come back to the Quran. Because the Quran...
No, but you didn't answer what I said.
But the Quran...
Before you get there.
No. The Quran, as we've demonstrated in our discussion, makes statements that are factually false. They do not correspond to reality.
No, but that's what you're saying. What I'm saying is that, look, can I just come back on this, yeah? We have to understand, okay? You keep saying this. If you want to be a serious apologist, that's more than just like a propagandist. You need to kind of listen to what I'm saying a little bit here. Everyone knows that, I've just told you this, the literal interpretation of the Quran is understood by the language, what the language can facilitate.
Yeah.
For example, you mentioned the halaqah, yeah? Halaqah has 3 meanings in the Arabic language. In fact, the word is used in other places in the Quran.
That's the one about the leech and...
Yeah, the clinging and stuff.
Yeah, the clinging.
Well, you know, it's mentioned وَلَا تَذَرُوهَا كَالْمُعَلَّقَةِ when it talks about when you have more than one wife. Don't go to one and leave the other one hanging, suspended.
Now that would be metaphorical, wouldn't it?
Of course it is.
Yeah.
You know, I believe in metaphor in the Quran. Right? And we're not saying we don't believe in metaphoric language. What we're saying is, when you metaphorize things which are not intended to be metaphorized, that's where the problems come. Here's what I'm saying is, going back to the metaphors that contradict each other. So are you happy to say that it's ischiology, it's myth, that Genesis is myth?
I am happy to say that a literal reading of Genesis is not what is meant to be understood.
Right, so is it myth?
Yeah, so long as we don't do a false equivalence, that myth means false.
No, I'm not saying that.
Because I believe that the mythology of Genesis is completely true.
I know that, I know.
I believe every word of Genesis.
I know that, yeah, you're saying that. So you believe that Genesis is a myth, but you're depending on some kind of coherent understanding of truth. What I'm saying is, the problem is even a myth which contradicts itself is useless.
No.
It's meaningless.
Yeah, because you're asserting a contradiction based on a prima facie literal reading. And I keep telling you that the prima facie literal reading is not how you're supposed to read Genesis.
So, okay, you know when it said no plant has sprung up yet?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So it's talking, well, let's look at that entire chapter. Because bad Dawah is taking verses out of their context.
Fine.
Right? So the Genesis story in chapter 2 is talking ultimately about the creation of man and the importance of man to creation. That man is the priest of God in creation. That he's meant to be God's representative on earth in creation, care and to cultivate. That's the story of Genesis 2.
What I would say to you though,
so the point is...
You mentioned something about modernism, right? Can I just say one second? John, 1 second.
One second.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if you assert that the Quran, when it, for instance, talks about the idea of the blood.
Yeah, but I'm saying blood is not the only thing.
Right, but the point is, that's factually false.
What are you saying? Well,
I'm saying that an embryo is not a blood clot. Are you arguing that an embryo is a blood clot?
Let me tell you what I said, right? The word is alaqa.
Yes.
What does alaqa mean?
It's been translated as blood clot.
It can be translated as blood clot, but there's 3 translations.
It literally translates
I know,
in this Quran.
bro, you have to listen to what I'm saying. I've done a whole series on this, right? You can check it on Sapiens Institute. What I'm saying is that one of the words I've just told you, it means to suspend, and I just gave you an example in the Quran that وَلَا تَذَرُوهَا كَالْمُعَلَّقَةِ وَلَا تَمِيلُوا كُلَّ الْمَيْلِ فَتَذَرُوهَا كَالْمُعَلَّقَةِ. So if you have 2 wives, 3 or 4, don't go to one and then just leave the other one like that, so you leave her suspended.
So are you saying, you're saying that this is metaphor?
What? No, it's not metaphor. No.
So it's not metaphor.
No. You're not understanding what I'm saying.
So when it says,
let him carry on. He said 3
then
points.
we made the nutfa into a clot.
Okay, good.
Is that accurate or inaccurate?
Yeah, it's accurate.
So you actually believe that an embryo is a blood clot?
No, hold on.
Coagulated blood. That's what you believe.
He just jumped on another
You're going on to another point. What I'm saying is that you're saying it's bad dawah. You've already referred to the Genesis account as a myth. I'm explaining to you.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
No,
it's not a bad thing.
Right, let's finish now. Yeah?
We're finished.
Right, what I'm saying is, even if you understand, yeah? Oh, careful. It's gonna break, man. Bro, man, be careful. That's gonna fall and break. Yeah. There's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he said, "Naha an-nabiy sallallahu alaihi wasallam an ad-daman." He said that there are 2 things, 2 bloods which are prohibited. 2 bloods.
Yep.
He said at-tahal and the spleen and the lung and the liver. Yeah. Now, in Arabic language, you have to understand this, because if you don't get this, you will not improve your apologetics. That's it.
I'm happy to let other people judge.
Listen. The Prophet referred to the spleen and the liver as 2 bloods. Okay, even though there's no blood there, they're not blood. It's not blood. So what it is that the Arab custom is that you describe something by how it looks. Do you understand this?
I'm hearing you.
And this is an evidence, because the Prophet said 2 blood, and it wasn't actually blood. It was the liver and the spleen. So when the Quran states it's alaqa, even the translation which says blood clot, it doesn't mean by composition, it means by aesthetic value. Do you understand this?
I hear that.
Okay, good. Now, that's what I'm saying. There's three primary meanings. One of them means that. One of them means alaqa, something which clings. Another thing means something which is like a clot. Yes.
Right, let me reply to this. We're gonna have to stop. Because if you get any more microphone from you, no matter how strong you are, you're just going to fall over and that'll be falling into me. So the point is, the translation that we have from Muslim scholars in Saudi Arabia, they have chosen clot. They have chosen clot.
I'm not Shamsi.
They have chosen clot, right?
Wrong guy.
They have chosen clot. And that is scientifically inaccurate. Fact.
Fine.
Now,
My friend is a translator of the Quran. Two of them.
One second.
You know, there's a Muhammad Hijab translation
Are
of
you wanting to
Quran.
listen? Are you wanting to listen? So the reality is that when all you did is just make your prophet look worse, because you said that your prophet described things as blood that are not blood.
That's
in
what
the
the Arabs-
hadith. So my point to you is, this is just more evidence that your prophet was not guided by God.
Thanks,
Right,
but that's not what the
Bro,
evidence is.
and we're gonna stop.
Right, all right.
It's lovely to talk to you. Just to show how much I appreciated a calm conversation. If you read it or not is entirely up to you. But I want to give you a vote. Yeah?
He likes reading.
Like not 2 pence pamphlets. That's an
What,
actual.
man? I know this also.
Have a read of that. That's my gift to you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Since you gave me a gift,
Yeah.
now let me give you a gift.
I will definitely take a copy.
No, I'll give you a gift as well. This is a pen. It's a pen I like.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. I accept your gratitude. All right. You look after yourself.
Take care.
Take care.
Good job. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Rob. Well done.
I had to pray.